अगं माझं रेकॉर्ड केलं असतं तर बरं झालं असतं की.
सो आपल्यातलीच गेस्ट स्पीकर योगिता बापट आणि तिची एक
Oh,
छोटी
yeah.
इंट्रोडक्शन तिच्या शब्दामध्ये सांगते मी. So Yogita's knowledge of child development comes from her work as an occupational therapist and her experience as a mom, of course. She has worked as an OT in early childhood intervention for 20 plus years. It's a long experience. Prior to which, she worked in the patients in ICU, acute rehab, traumatic brain injury, and orthotrauma. Her love is pediatrics. She is also a yoga teacher and loves learning about the mind-body connection and holistic health. That's a great, perfect match for our group as well. So, Rogita, the platform is all yours.
Thank, thank you, Alka. Should I start the screen sharing?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So, namaskar sagyana. Like Alkani introduction केलं. I'm an occupational therapist. आणि थोड्या आठवड्यापूर्वी I was in one of the live sessions and somebody asked a question about related to child development. And at that time, a little light bulb went out in my brain कि maybe I could contribute something and volunteer a session. मला या प्लॅटफॉर्मवरती खूप चांगली माहिती मिळाली आहे, which I've really applied to my life because I feel like life is a lifelong journey of learning and changing and adapting to become better. So I thought I could contribute something, and that's where I approached the team and I said I can do this if somebody is interested, and they were gracious and kind enough to give me the time today to present some of the things that I know, and I'm really interested in this topic. So I think there's some good sharing. Ani, so Sagyana, thank you for being here this morning, and I hope that you can get something out of the session today that you can apply to your knowledge or even to your everyday life. So माझा interest child development मध्ये आहे because I'm actually working in the field, but also I feel like it's important for other people to kind of know a little bit about child development because it reflects brain development. It reflects, how our brain functions, how our brain processes information. And I feel like these strategies, आपण लहान मुलांना ज्या करतो किंवा शिकवतो, those are applicable to our own life, throughout the lifespan, which is what I did with the introduction last week. So today we're going to look at some of those strategies and look at how the brain develops. So आजचे objectives आहेत की to understand what is child development and how it happens, to understand the factors that affect child development, and as caregivers, whether as aji azoba or ai baba or a neighbor or a teacher, to see how we can facilitate that child development with the kids in our life or even apply it to our own life. So the next slide, what our brains are exposed, looks at what growth and child development is. So आपण जेव्हा मुलाला डॉक्टरकडे घेऊन जातो पीडियाट्रिशियनकडे, ते दोन गोष्टी मेजर करतात. One is growth and one is development. So basically growth is an irreversible constant increase in size, which we all understand. आपण बघतो मुलांची हाईट वाढते, कधी कधी आपलं वजन वाढतं, but when we go to the doctor's office, they measure the weight, they measure the height, they measure like the head circumference of the child up to a certain age because the brain is growing. They measure body mass index, and then they give you like these charts, or they give you graphs so you can track the progress that your child is making. So development is the same way. Development is progress in a psychomotor capacity. So the domains that they look at for development is they look at gross motor skills, which is how we use our whole body, like the big muscles of our body to move, whether it's to come to sitting up, whether it's to crawl, whether it's to walk. Then they look at fine motor development, which is how we use our hands to do more intricate things. Like मुलं लहान असताना blocks बरोबर खेळतात किंवा manipulatives बरोबर खेळतात. Later on, they turn to handwriting when they're, at a school appropriate age. So those are fine motor skills. They also look at social emotional skills. So as a human being, we're a very social animal. That's the way our brain is kind of designed. So how does the child interact when they're very, very small babies. How do they interact with the caregiver? Do they meet their basic needs? Later on, as they grow older, how do they interact with, you know, their immediate caregivers at home and later on at school? So it looks at the social and how is the child expressing their emotions and their feelings? Are they able to soothe themselves? So that's social emotional. And then there's also communication, which is broken up into receptive, which is what the child understands. If you tell a child a simple command, itaye, does a child understand that and, you know, come to you? Zar ka mulaचं नाव हे केलं की Siddharth, is the mulga turning to his name no matter where he is in the room and looking at who called my name? So that's receptive. And expressive is using either gestures or words to kind of get our needs communicated, to express what we have to say. And then the one more domain is adaptive, which is how we go about our everyday activities. You know, whether it's like आपण नीट जेवण जेवताना चमच्याने खातोय की नाही, नीट जेवण chew करतोय की नाही. When we get to a little bit older, you know, maybe 2-3 वर्षाचे असताना मूल दाखवताय का की त्यांना, you know, पार्टीला जायचंय किंवा सू होतीये किंवा असं काही. So that's the adaptive domain. So all these domains have developmental milestones, and these milestones are basically common throughout the world. So जरी मूल भारतात जन्मलं आणि भारतात वाढलं किंवा अमेरिकेत जन्मलं आणि वाढलं, all the developmental milestones are basically the same throughout the world. The ranges are pretty big, so it's not like 12 महिन्याचं असताना जर का मूल चाललं नाही तर मग oh, there's something happening. There's a range because every child has a different experience. So there's a range for these developmental milestones, and the doctors generally look, is this child progressing the way they're supposed to progress? So both growth and development are highly dependent on our genes, our nutrition, and our environment. So the genes is like the hardware for our development and growth. You know, the genes are what we're like born, coming to this world with. And the nutrition, the environment, and then the experiences that we get will vary depending on child to child. So the nutrition, environment, and the experiences are like the software. So when the software comes into play, it changes the expression of these genes so that it affects how the genes are expressed. And we're going to learn about that more, but we're going to watch a video first. So let me...
What we do, what we see and experience will all help determine which of those connections are going to stay and which ones are going to be cut away. This is a picture of the fetal brain growth from the age of 25 days.
Sagyana, dishtay ka the big screen of the YouTube video?
Nahi, chota screen
Oh, okay. Then let me change it and then go back to... Okay. आता Sagyana?
Yes. Yeah,
and you can see that the brain starts very, very primitive and very quickly develops into having the general brain shape. But the main thing that changes is the folds in the brain. The folds in the brain, which give rise to this characteristic brain pattern, are there because they increase the surface area. By having folds, we can get more neurons into that tissue. And the more neurons we have, the more we are able to use that information to do complex tasks that humans do. So humans have the most folded brains that there are. There are 3 major changes that take place during brain development. The first one is what we call the proliferation of dendritic branches. Just as a tree grows with a long central stalk, which we would call in the brain an axon, it also develops all of these branches. And brain cells sprout these branches, which connect to other brain cells. So that's one thing that occurs. Another one is this process called myelination, which I'll show some pictures of in just a bit. But this is a covering of the axons. These are the major branches that I was talking about. And this myelin is made of a very fatty substance that actually comes from a certain kind of neuron. And it's like an insulation material that allows information to process and to be sent very quickly from one brain cell to the next. And finally, there's that process of pruning, dying off of brain cells and brain connections that look as if they're no longer needed. Here's a picture of what it looks like across development. In the newborn brain, we have a fair number of neurons here, but as you can see, they're very simple. They've got a single long axon that's not really connected to anything and only a few little branches, and the cells themselves are quite small. During development, these branches really start growing quite a bit, although the actual number of neurons is not changing. By 9 months, you can start to see many of these connections forming and becoming more complex. But look at the age of 2 years. Look how incredibly dense all those connections are. They're the same number of neurons here, but that's connected, everything is practically connected to everything else. However, if you contrast that with the young adult brain, you can see that a lot of those connections have started to prune away, and the cells themselves are larger, and the connections between cells are thicker. They've become stronger with age, but there are fewer of them. This is the general process where we talk about a transition between brain plasticity, that is the potential for the brain to do a lot of different things, and brain efficiency, that is just keeping those connections that we need so that we can use our brain energy as efficiently as possible.
All right, so I'm gonna go back to the main screen now. And so you guys can...
What our brains are exposed to, what we do, what...
Okay, so everybody sees my slideshow now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So as we saw in the last slide, one of the main basic things that affects growth and development is the nutrients that we get into our body. And I know Alka has talked a lot in detail with various presentations about what food is ideal for us. So I'm not going to talk about that part because I'm not an expert in that, but I am going to talk about making mealtime a success. So me 0 to 3 years च्या मुलांबरोबर काम करते आणि त्याच्यामध्ये sometimes, I get children who are not eating. They're very picky eaters. They're not interested in eating. And this becomes frustrating, not just for the child, but it becomes frustrating for the parents also sometimes, especially for the mothers. Because I think in Eastern cultures, the child eating is so reflective on the mother and the nurturing the mother provides. So there's a lot of pressure on mothers. So how do we make mealtime successful? One of the most important things I tell my parents is routine and timeliness are the most important things in childhood. The routine gives structure, it gives predictability, it gives a consistency to the child's life. And all of us like to be in control. So when we want to be in control, we want to know what's going to happen next in our life. If there's a routine, then the child knows from their everyday life that आता हे गोष्ट होणार आहे, ह्याच्यानंतर मी जेवणार आहे, ह्याच्यानंतर मी झोपणार आहे. So that is really helpful in them transitioning from one activity to the other. And timeliness is a thing that each of us have our own biological clock. So some kids will get hungry early, some kids will get hungry later, some kids will sleep more, some kids will sleep less. But even as a baby, even a 2-month-old baby is giving us cues as to, I'm hungry, I'm crying, I have a certain cry, and this is my hunger cry. And that caregiver picks up those cues and says, okay, it's time for the bottle, or it's time for the breast, it's time to start eating. So the timeliness and routine is very important in a child's life. I also like to tell parents that, have the child sit in one place when they're eating, because mealtime is a sensory experience. जेव्हा जेवण समोर येतं आपल्या त्या प्लेटमध्ये वेगळ्या वेगळ्या भाज्या असतात, आमटी असते, पोळी असते, भात असतो, किंवा ज्या काही गोष्टी असतात, they have like different colors to the food. The food has different textures even through seeing. The food has different textures when the child touches the food. The food is giving off different smells, and every food has a different smell. So this plate is like a plethora of sensations coming into the child's brain. So we want that child to feel comfortable with all these sensations. Because our brain is always, focusing on survival. Survival is like the key thing that the brain focuses on. So if this child sees this food and it's like, oh, they're definitely not going to bring it to their mouth on their own, or they're definitely not going to let somebody else bring it to their mouth. किंवा हात लावून त्यांना like मला हात लावून कसं तरी वाटतंय जेवण, then they don't feel comfortable with that. They're going to start resisting. They're like, मला हे नकोय जे काय तू समोर ठेवलंयस. So we want to give them that time to get exposed to that food before it gets to the mouth. And once it gets to the mouth, there's a different kind of thing that comes into play. So our mouth is like analogous to a blender. आपण blender मध्ये जेवण घालतो, blade सगळं chop up करते, and the container itself breaks down the food. So our mouth is like that. Once we bring the food to our mouth, whether it's with a spoon or our hands, the lips have a way of clearing the food so that it goes from the outside to the inside. And then the lips, will seal shut so that the food stays in the mouth. Then our tongue comes into play, and the tongue is like moving side to side and moving the food from one side of the mouth to the other. And then obviously the cheeks are kind of containing the food in so that they also help move in and out. So if there's any food pocketed in the gums, they're moving the food to the middle of the mouth where our teeth are chewing and biting. And the food goes from whole food to a consistency which gets to be swallowed. So again, if something there is not working properly, if the child doesn't know how to chew, or if the child's tongue doesn't work and they just keep the food in their mouth for long periods of time, the food has not gone to a consistency where this opening says open, I'm ready for the food to go down. So then again, I don't feel comfortable. This is like a threat to my life. I am not going to swallow it. So we want to realize all those mechanisms that go into play where the food is concerned. So I tell parents, give the child time, let them, look at the plate, let them feel comfortable with all those sensations, let them feel comfortable with it in their mouth before you just shove the next spoon, or before you just say, चला 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 आपल्याला हे करायचंय ते करायचंय. Give them time to figure all that out. And I tell parents, offer the colors of the rainbow for the food. Don't just give the same food over and over. Kai kai mula picky astat khanya. They have like a very limited repertoire of what they eat. So जर का वरण भात, माझा मुलगा वरण भात खूप छान खातो, पटापट होतं जेवण, आपण वरण भात देऊया. Giving varan bhat every day is going to take away all their experiences of the other foods that they eat. Like Dr. Bukheimer talked in the previous video, the pathways that are not used die, the cells die, the pathways are pruned, they become like non-existent. So we want our child to be like, oh, broccoliचं texture वेगळं असतं, आमटी वेगळी दिसते, आणि आमटीमध्ये कांदे, टोमॅटोचे छोटे छोटे floating तुकडे असले तरी पण I need to feel comfortable with getting my hands in there, because once all those prerequisites are met, then the child is going to feel comfortable putting the food in the mouth. So giving them time, not giving them the same food over and over again, is what is going to expose your child to different varieties of food that they'll be more open to eating. So we basically, even if they don't eat the food, I tell the parents, जे काय तुम्ही खाताय ते एक एक चमचा त्यांच्या प्लेटवरती असलं पाहिजे, म्हणजे जरी त्यांनी ते खाल्लं नाही तरी 10-15 मिनिटं त्यांना त्या जेवणाकडे बघू दे, त्यांना त्याला हात लावू दे. मुलाला म्हणा की ओ मला भरव, मला घास भरव, म्हणजे मी खाऊ शकेन तुझ्या हाताने. So that way they're touching the food, they're getting to smell the food. So we want all those opportunities to be there at mealtime. And I, suggest against grazing. जर का जेवण, chips, easy access to cookies, easy access to sugary drinks, जर का समोरच असलं आणि मुलं सारखं ते खात असतील, तर it kind of takes away from their hunger cues, from their, they're never filled because they're constantly grazing or drinking something, and then they're not hungry at mealtime. Something else I also want to focus on is force feeding. Force feeding is a no-no, with the mothers being responsible for the eating. A lot of the time mothers feel this pressure and they're like, okay, चला TV लावूया, video बघा, जेवण भरवा आणि जाऊया, दुसरं काहीतरी करूया, हे संपू दे एकदा. So we don't want that kind of an experience for the child, because we want the child to understand that it's a social experience, it's a sensory experience, it's a mindful experience. So the social experience comes into giving positive messages about food to the child. आपण सगळीजण एकत्र जेवायला बसतोय टेबलावरती, सगळीजण बोलतायत, how was your day, लोक हसतायत, किंवा they might be discussing something, and everybody sees that food is something that brings everybody to the table, and it's an enjoyable experience because I get to see everybody together during that day at that meal. We also want it to be a mindful experience so that, थोडं ग्रॅटिट्यूड शिकवलं मुलाला की आईने हे जेवण बनवलंय आणि किती छान जेवण बनवलंय, आईचा इतका एफर्ट गेला किंवा बाबांनी पण बनवलंय. We want the child to realize that, we are grateful for this food. We are grateful to how the farmers grow the food. Talk to them about where the food comes from so that they understand that it just doesn't just magically appear whether I like it or not. You have to imbibe that from the time they're small kids. So all those things make it a positive experience. And then I also tell parents, don't just sit them at mealtime, get them involved in pre-meal activities. When you go grocery shopping, apple ghalun 4 apples bagमध्ये घाल. So, the child is sitting in the cart, you move them near the produce section, they're pick, apple असं असतं. ऑरेंज असं वेगळं असतं किंवा सॅलरीला वेगळं फील असतो. सो यू वॉन्ट दम टू गेट ऑल दोज एक्सपिरियन्सेस. जर का कोशिंबीर बनवत असलं, आई कोशिंबीर बनवत असली तर मग आपण काकडी किसली आहे, हाताने काकडी उचला, बोलमध्ये घाला. नंतर दाण्याचं कूट, हाताने दाण्याचं कूट घाला किंवा कढीपत्ताचा वास असा असतो. सो ऑल get children involved in experiences of mealtime, because that not only helps with their food intake, but it gets them engaged later on to be more involved in eating healthier on their own. Something else that's important is water. So, water is our body's like 60% water, and our lungs are like 83% water. Our brain is almost like 70-something% water. So drinking water and being hydrated is very important. As babies, most babies will get the water through the breast milk or the formula. So they get that consistently and constantly. But as the kids get older, have a water bottle nearby and encourage them to constantly be like aware, like, tahan lagle, pani pya. So how much water should the kids drink? It's about, according to their age, they should drink number of 8 ounces of water equal to their age. So say if the child is like 5 years old, so you give them a water bottle that has like 5 8-ounce cups. So like maybe like 40 ounces of water, fill it up throughout the day, or fill it up in their sippy cup or fill it up in their water bottle and have it available to them if they're not queuing on their own that I need water. And for the older children beyond the age of 9, or if they're teenagers, they should be aware that they have to drink half an ounce for every pound that the child weighs. So say if the child weighs like 90 pounds, they're going to drink about 45 ounces of water. So just kind of being aware that, this is how much water the child needs to drink. So sleep is one of the most important things that we're really starting to kind of miss out on nowadays, because our lives are so busy. And believe it or not, even children's lives are so busy. So as a baby is born, basically, they're sleeping, they're eating, they're pooping, and they're getting to know their immediate environment and their world. So a baby till 12 months old should have about 12 to 16 hours of sleep, including naps. So that includes naps. Babies are constantly napping. So 12 to 16 hours is what is the norm. From 1 to 2 years, it's 11 to 14 hours, and this includes naps. So the 1 to 2-year-old child might not take like 5-6 naps a day, but they will still be at least, taking 2 or 3 naps a day, broken up into like 1.5 hour or 2 hour kind of segments. 3 to 5 years old, that child is slowly weaning off of their naps. They might go to 2 naps at like 3 years old. By 5 years old, they're getting ready, for bigger things in life. So they might either completely wean out their nap and they might not be napping anymore, but they still need that 10 to 13 hours, which mostly happens at night. 6 to 12 years old is 9 to 12 hours. So even with homework, even with having to play outside, go to various classes, we want to make sure that the kids sleep at a consistent time so that they're getting that 9 to 12 hours sleep, depending on the age and the amount of sleep that the child's biological clock needs. 13 to 18 years old is 8 to 10 hours. And we're going to look at a video.
My name is Matthew Walker. I am a professor of neuroscience and psychology at the University of California, Berkeley, and I am the author of the book, Why We Sleep. We certainly know that a lack of sleep will actually prevent your brain from being able to initially make new memories. So it's almost as though without sleep, the memory inbox of the brain shuts down and you can't commit new experiences to memory. So those new incoming informational emails are just bounced and you end up feeling as though you're amnesic. You can't essentially make and create those new memories. We also know that a lack of sleep will lead to an increased development of a toxic protein in the brain that is called beta amyloid. And that is associated with Alzheimer's disease, because it is during deep sleep at night when a sewage system within the brain actually kicks into high gear and it starts to wash away this toxic protein, beta amyloid. So if you're not getting enough sleep each and every night, more of that Alzheimer's related protein will build up. The more protein that builds up, the greater your risk of going on to develop dementia in later life. What are the effects of sleep deprivation on the body? Well, there are many different effects. Firstly, we know that sleep deprivation affects the reproductive system. We know that men who are sleeping just 5 to 6 hours a night have a level of testosterone, which is that of someone 10 years their senior. So a lack of sleep will age you by almost a decade in terms of that aspect of virility and wellness. We also know that a lack of sleep impacts your immune system. So after just one night of 4 to 5 hours of sleep, there is a 70% reduction in critical anti-cancer fighting immune cells called natural killer cells. And that's the reason that we know that short sleep duration predicts your risk for developing numerous forms of cancer. And that list currently includes cancer of the bowel, cancer of the prostate, as well as cancer of the breast. In fact, the link between a lack of sleep and cancer is now so strong that recently the World Health Organization decided to classify any form of nighttime shift work as a probable carcinogen. So in other words, jobs that may induce cancer because of a disruption of your sleep-wake rhythms. We also know that a lack of sleep impacts your cardiovascular system, because it is during deep sleep at night that you receive this most wonderful form of effectively blood pressure medication. Your heart rate drops, your blood pressure goes down. If you're not getting sufficient sleep, you're not getting that reboot of the cardiovascular system. So your blood pressure rises. You have, if you're getting 6 hours of sleep or less, a 200% increased risk of having a fatal heart attack or a stroke in your lifetime. There is a global experiment that is performed on 1.6 billion people twice a year, and it's called daylight savings time. And we know that in the spring, when we lose 1 hour of sleep, we see a subsequent 24% increase in heart attacks the following day. Another question perhaps is, what is the recycle rate of a human being? How long can we actually last without sleep before we start to see declines in your brain function or even impairments within your body? And the answer seems to be about 16 hours of wakefulness. Once you get past 16 hours of being awake, that's when we start to see mental deterioration and physiological deterioration in the body. We know that after you've been awake for 19 or 20 hours, your mental capacity is so impaired that you would be as deficient as someone who is legally drunk behind the wheel of a car. So if you were to ask me what is the recycle rate of a human being, it does seem to be about 16 hours, and we need about 8 hours of sleep to repair the damage of wakefulness. Wakefulness essentially is low-level brain damage.
So he talked about the importance of sleep, and basically now we're going to look at, how do we get that sleep? How do we get it so that there's so many distractions nowadays in life, that how do we get to that sleep? So that's what we're going to look at next. All right, so sleep hygiene. Again, the thing I'm stressing most with my parents is routines, the consistency of a bedtime routine or habits that bring the child to sleep. So, child comes back from school or daycare, let them have their snack, let them play, let them get out and move around and play with their friends or play on their own or whatever the case is. Then it's time to do homework or sit and read if your child doesn't go to school. Then maybe it's dinner time. And then again, somebody might want to do homework, and then it's time to go take a bath, and then slowly the bath time will will help us get like a little bit slower down in our schedule. And then, it's getting time to be ready for bed after you change in your pajamas or whatever. So routines give the child that consistency, that predictability, that stability, and they know what's coming up next. So as soon as, we get to like, oh, I took a bath. Now I know what's coming up next. It's going to be time to go to sleep. So I can't run to the living room and play with my toys and stuff. Regulation is something that's important in anything that we do, and it's the just right state. So it's the convergence of our actions, of our body state, of our thoughts and our emotions. They come together to be just right, to match the state, match the demands of the task or the demands of the environment. So if you're like super hyper and really excited, you're going to not be able to fall asleep very easily. So the regulation piece is important. So to be well regulated, we can help the child by, having them participate in physical activity. Any kind of physical activity, if it's like nice and vigorous, it really goes to the brain and it organizes the brain, and it grounds the brain. So it helps the brain to be where it needs to be. So for the daily physical activity for kids, for children, it's recommended that there should be a minimum of 45 minutes to 3 hours of daily physical activity. And in today's day and age, that is so hard for, school age kids to get, but that's what the research shows. So whether they're running outside, whether they're riding their bike around the neighborhood, whether they go play basketball, or whether you take them to some kind of physical activity, taekwondo, karate, soccer class, or whatever it is, that physical activity is helping their brain get reorganized for whatever they have to do, whether it's like sleep, whether it's study, whether it's going to a music lesson. So it really helps the brain, that physical activity. The quiet time is also important. If before sleeping, if there's quiet time, the brain is naturally tuned to the routine. So the child knows it's quiet time. I can read a book, or even if I just lie in bed and look at the ceiling for, 5 minutes or so, the quiet time kind of regulates your breathing. It slows down the breathing. It takes out all the extraneous stimuli. The TV is not on. There's not something happening in your room. So it tells your brain, you're going to get ready for sleep. Let's quiet down. The breathing actually kicks in that parasympathetic response. We become more conscious of our breathing. That relaxation response comes in, and your body just naturally melts, and you get into this state where you're like, okay, now I feel like I'm falling asleep. So all those things are pretty important, as is diet, as is limiting the caffeine or the sugar or the, snacks that contain a lot of chemicals close to dinner time. Something else that's important is spending time outdoors. The sunlight that we get has a direct link to our circadian rhythm. So the circadian rhythm is like the biological clock for each person. So, each person has a different biological clock. So the sunlight, it helps with the day and night cycle. And then basically, as you get that sunlight, it produces melatonin in your brain. And then the melatonin is what helps us go into that deep REM sleep, where he talked about the memories being laid in your hippocampus, and the what we do with our body being repaired is what happens when we're sleeping. So the circadian rhythm is maintained when we get that sunlight. And last but not least, screen time is very important. The screen emits a blue light. So that blue light disrupts our melatonin production, our melatonin release. So basically, the blue light from the screen is telling you, wake up, it's daytime, it's not time to sleep yet. So secondhand television, the TV being on in the living room, and the child is sitting in the living room, and the TV is constantly on. Or, oh, before I go to sleep, I want to check one last time, what my friends are saying on Snapchat or something. Or I just want to watch a YouTube video or a little video or a song to kind of wind down. That's not going to help them go to sleep. So screen time off for like at least 2 hours before bedtime. So we're going to watch a video again.
Now, why do these early experiences matter? The typical newborn brain is 333 grams. And in the first 2 years of life,
no, it's small. It's small.
It's an extraordinary period of brain growth. unparalleled over the life
Is it still
course.
small?
And you can see that here. Here is
Yes.
brain growth over the lifespan.
All right, do you see it now?
Yeah.
On your screen? Okay, thank you.
And you can see how steep the rise is early on. And it continues to grow until about age 20. And I'll let you guys in the audience find yourselves over on the right there and see why you had such a hard time finding your car keys this morning. Now, we're actually born with a lifetime supply of brain cells or neurons. That's not what actually grows. It's the connections between those brain cells, what we call synapses, that account for that brain growth. And those synapses form based on early experiences. If you will, the mind is fine-tuned to the world that babies inhabit. And to give you an example of that you can all relate to, any child born anywhere in the world can learn to speak any language fluently. But if she isn't exposed to certain sounds early in the first few years of her life, she can learn to speak another language later, but she'll never sound like a native speaker. So a baby born today in mainland China, as amazing as it is, can learn to speak fluent Mandarin. But if she doesn't hear English sounds early in her life, she can learn to speak English later. But as we all know, we know such people, she'll struggle making certain sounds. It wasn't because she wasn't born with that capacity. It was because her early experience didn't condition her mind to learn them. Now, this graphic actually shows just that. What you see is the brain, and you see the neurons and the synapses connecting them. We're born with about 2,500 synapses. By age 3, we have 15,000. And then over time, those connections are actually pruned in response to the external stimulation, the external world that we live in. Now, to give you another example of that, this is the breathing pattern of a one-day-old infant listening to music. And you can see here that he's listening to Mozart, and then Stravinsky is put on, and then Mozart again. Now, I show you this not to present some kind of an infantile critique of classical music, and those of you in the audience who are classic music aficionados might have a hypothesis about why Stravinsky did this to his breathing pattern. But the point is that even at one day of life, there's a discernible physiological reaction to what babies are actually hearing. Now, we know from decades of research that too little stimulation early on is bad for brain development. I show you here 2 PET scans. Now, PET scans are measures of brain function. The brighter colors show more brain activity. And on the left is a PET scan of a normal kindergartner. And on the right is a PET scan of a child who was raised in a horribly neglected environment. This is actually a PET scan from a child who was raised in a Romanian orphanage and was profoundly neglected early in life. And you'll notice that there are areas of his brain that show no activity at all. It didn't develop as a result of too little stimulation. Now, this is a horrific example of too little stimulation and the untoward consequences of it. But the question we've had in our lab for some time is, what about too much? Is it actually possible to overstimulate the developing brain, or more appropriately, to inappropriately stimulate the developing brain in ways that are actually not beneficial, but harmful? And this is important because we're technologizing childhood today in a way that's unprecedented. In 1970, the average age at which children began to watch television regularly was 4 years, like this cute little girl here. And today, based on research that we've done, it's 4 months. It's not just how early they watch, but how much they watch. The typical child before the age of 5 is watching about 4.5 hours of TV a day. That represents as much as 40% of their waking hours. Which brings us to Baby Einstein. Now, many of you probably have not seen Baby Einstein, but I will show you a random 20-second clip from Baby Einstein Day on the Farm, and here it is. In that 20-second clip, there were 7 scene changes, about 1 every 3 seconds. It's about the most exhausting day on the farm since John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. And of course, it's nothing like being on a real farm, right? Adults watching this find it discombobulating because your mind is trying to make a coherent narrative out of this. And there is no coherent narrative. It jumps all over the place. But babies aren't trying to make a coherent narrative out of it. They're not capable of doing that. It's all of that screen change, all of that stimulation that's keeping them actually engaged in the screen. So we've had for a while what we call the overstimulation hypothesis, which is that prolonged exposure to this rapid image change during this critical window of brain development would precondition the mind to expect high levels of input. And that would lead to inattention in later life. So you watch enough Baby Einstein, Day on the Farm as a baby, and when you go to a farm as a school-age child, it's boring. It's too slow. How come there's no sheep suddenly popping into my face? How come there's no marionette going back and forth? Why do I have to walk from here to there? That's the general idea, that you're conditioning the mind to that reality, which doesn't actually exist. And we tested this some years ago, and what we found was that the more television children watch before age 3, the more likely they were to actually have attentional problems at school age. Specifically, for each hour that they watched before the age of 3, their chances of having attentional problems was increased by about 10%. So a child who watched 2 hours of TV a day before the age of 3 would be 20% more likely to have attention problems compared to a child who watched none. Now, what else did we find? We found that the more cognitive stimulation children received, and we measured cognitive stimulation in terms of how often parents read to their child, how often they took them to the museum, how often they sang to them. We found that cognitive stimulation reduced the chances of attentional problems later in life. In fact, each hour of cognitive stimulation reduced them by about 30%. So if you will, these are two sides of the same coin. There's certain things that we can do early on in our children's lives that enhance their ability to pay attention, and certain things that we can do early on that actually impede them. Now, if our hypothesis was right, that it's based on the pacing of the programs, and you might imagine that what children watch actually is important. And so content would be key. And I'll give you 2 examples of content to illustrate that point. The first is the Powerpuff Girls movie, the right mix of sugar and spice for a satisfying rush. I don't know how many of you have seen that, but here's a scene from that. Okay, so that was, again, you can see a lot of rapid sequencing. In fact, this was the first movie that was ever rated PG for nonstop frenetic animated action. I'm not making it up. That's the back of the box there. Now, I want to contrast that with something that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. Really needs no introduction, but this is a clip from Mr. Rogers for you to watch.
Hi, Owen.
Oh, hi,
How are you?
Chris. I'm fine. How are you?
Good, thanks. I brought my television neighbor to see what a restaurant was like.
Oh, I'm so glad. Can I show you a table?
Certainly.
I'm awfully busy today. One of the waitresses is ill,
I see.
so I'm sort of doing double duty. How about this?
This is fine. Thank you
Grand.
very much.
Sit down and I'll be right back.
All right. When you come to a restaurant, usually somebody shows you what table you're supposed to sit at. And one of the first things you do is to put your napkin either on your lap or up here. And then, well, this is the way a table is set.
So Fred Rogers invented reality TV. He's not credited with it. Actually, it's not reality, right? It's even slower paced than reality. The waitress says, "I'm awfully busy," but she doesn't seem the least bit hurried. So you can see that there are very, very real differences in pacing. And when we followed up our study with a subsequent experiment to look at what children actually watch, what you see is that educational programs like Mr. Rogers pose no increased risk of attentional problems. Entertainment programs like the Powerpuff Girls movie increase the chances by about 60%. And violent programming, which I didn't show you, increases it even by more than 100%. And violent programs are typically even more rapidly sequenced. Now, in the last year, we've been building actually a...
All right, so we're gonna switch back to the slideshow. And everybody
Yogita,
Yeah.
this is really very informative and good. I was wondering की तू प्रश्न शेवटी घेणार आहेस का मधून विचारलं तरी चालेल?
मी प्रश्न जर का शेवटी घेतले तर चालेल का सायली? म्हणजे I'll just have a flow of
चालेल.
thought. It's okay with you?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So going back to the slideshow, just to review, what Dr. Kostakis said, that a lot of the stuff that's marketed to kids is basically marketing for money. So you have to really screen what they're watching and how it's good for them, because a lot of the stimulation is impoverished stimulation. It's not comparable to reality. I'm really guilty of that baby Einstein. मी 6 वाजेपर्यंत काम करायचे, मग नंतर घरी आल्यावर मला थोडा टाइम हवा म्हणून मी अर्धा तास बेबी आईन्स्टाईन लावायचे, जेव्हा माझा मुलगा 8 महिन्याचा होता तेव्हा. आणि तेव्हा त्यांनी मार्केट केलेलं की क्लासिकल म्युझिक आहे, क्लासिकल म्युझिक हेल्प्स चिल्ड्रन्स ब्रेन्स. सो आय वॉज लाईक, क्लासिकल म्युझिक आहे, आय एम डुईंग हिम अ गुड थिंग, लेट हिम सेटल डाऊन. आणि मग एक व्हिडिओ नंतर, usually each video would be 35 minutes or something like that, I would turn it off. But again, the next Tuesday, it was the next day, it was the same thing. So the research came out 10 years later, when they did research into specifically baby Einstein. It said that it causes attention deficit problems. And me डोक्याला हात मारला आणि मी म्हटलं, great, I am the first one that caused, my kid is in university and he's really good and everything's good. But, what is marketed out there is not necessarily, they're marketing it to convince you that it's good, but you have to make those decisions yourself on what, you feel is worth it. So again, going back to, he talked about, it interferes with a lot of things. So one of the things that kids are developing is these variable reward pathways, and they're still developing them. So these kind of videos or anything that's just overstimulation, if you get overstimulated by it, your little kid's brain is definitely going to get overstimulated by it. So it's just a constant go, go, go. And that gives to their pleasure center the message that I want more. Give me more, give me more. So, they keep on wanting more, and then it changes their variable reward pathway. It changes their inhibition center. So we have an inhibition center in our frontal lobe, which basically tells us, okay, pause, wait, you cannot get something right away. You have to wait, be patient. So that gets affected. The working memory of the kids get affected because it's just coming up so fast, like we talked about in the food. Kids need time to process what is happening. Their brain actually needs that time to figure things out and put them in a certain place. So working memory gets disrupted, executive functioning, which is attention, cognitive flexibility, all those things are affected, as is language development. If you add social media to that, it's totally just, causing a disruption in their socio emotional status in a long way. There's so much pressure nowadays from what the child is expected to be because of social media, or what it should be like in your life, then it just kind of really changes what would have been. So how much screen time is appropriate, or what does the research say? I want to say 0 to 1 year old, zero screen time is recommended for 0 to 1 year old kids. And yet we see so many kids, waiting at the grocery store with their parent in the cart, holding the phone in their hand. I work with 0 to 3 year olds, and I have some 18-month-old kids who are better at navigating the iPad than I can. They know exactly what they need to do, and they're 18 months old. So less than 30 minutes for 2 to 7 year old kids, 1 hour for 7 to 12 year olds, 1.5 hours for 12 to 15 year olds, and 2 hours for 16 plus year olds. So the question comes up, like, how realistic is it? Because, now in middle school, kids are coming home with, some kind of like a computer or Chromebook or something, because a lot of their homework is online. So what do we do about if there's homework online and they have to use the computer? What do we do? So next, we're going to talk about some strategies.
Now, why do these?
So strategies. So Dr. Christakis mentioned content is one important thing. What are we watching? You obviously don't want, violent content, because that showed like the percentage was really high. If they have to do homework and stuff, they're already going to be on the screen. See what else they need, what else they want to watch, or what else they want to engage with, and then see how you can kind of, I don't want to say control that, but see what you can do about it. Context means that some research shows that sometimes with especially the little kids, if the parents sit down with the child and they watch something together, and then the parent has a conversation with the child about, what the child watched, what was the child's interpretation of what they watched, what was their understanding, and then if they have a discussion together, kids will, it'll be better than just the child sitting and just flicking through different videos and just watching things just randomly. And then the third thing you have to consider is the child. Some kids are not really motivated by screen devices. Age of the child, the maturity level of the child, how much the child gets attracted to the screen. So these three things are things that you should consider when you talk about, when you think about screen time for your child. We also have to give them the opportunities to do other things. So जेव्हा मी लहान होते तेव्हा मी बाहेर जाऊन खेळायचे किंवा मी arts and crafts करायचे. So get the child to move, because again, moving organizes the brain. So get them to move, get them to go play outside with a bunch of friends, play basketball, go around on the bike, sit in the grass and pluck grass and see what that's like, or, do whatever that gets the child moving. Have them play games, have them play games with their friends, have them run around and play reciprocal games like tag or whatever. Kids don't need a lot to be entertained, and we want them to learn to entertain themselves, because that's a self-regulation skill that's very important. They shouldn't be dependent on somebody else always entertaining them. So, save your Amazon boxes, save like the toilet paper rolls, save magazines, give them beads, give them yarn, give them anything you can buy at Michael's that they can, make something, they can create. Give them a journal, give them a book where they have to write down stuff, tell them to make up stories, tell them to color, to give them lots of avenues where they can express themselves, where they can use their body. And if your kids are older, you can tell them that I didn't have an iPad when I was growing up and I didn't die of boredom. I'm still here. Tell them that, boredom sometimes, it spurns creativity, it spurns reflection. You start to understand, okay, I'm bored, but what can I do so that I can entertain myself instead of being entertained by something else? Something that worked in our family was keeping the devices out of the bedroom. So basically we had a rule that this applied for, me and my husband and our child. So everybody had the same rule. You cannot take your device into the bedroom. The bedroom is not the place for devices. It's the room for homework or, sleeping or whatever. So any device that you use has to be in a common area. And we also have to understand that parents are role models. If the dad or mom are constantly going to their phone to check stuff, or if the TV is constantly on CNN, the whole evening, then the child starts understanding like, okay, it's okay for them. So then why is it not okay for me? And, overall, just besides that, parents are role models for children, because in our brain, we have these mirror neurons. So all of us have these mirror neurons in our brain, and we see if there's a person or other people in the room, our neurons kind of connect, and we see what those people are doing, how they're moving, what their emotions are, and they're like reflected off of each other. So kids already are seeing the behaviors of their parents, and they're kind of starting to build like these maps in their head of what behavior should be. So we want to be good role models. now with the advent of technology being so widespread, there's actually like apps and programs that you can buy. There's a big marketplace for apps and programs that kind of limit your child's interaction to the screen. You know, every operating system has like screen time data on your phone, on your iPad. They give you ways to control the password so your child can have like, you know, passwords. You can control the passwords for access to like YouTube or to certain other things. So you can definitely explore that. And if your child is an older child, then, you know, you can talk to them. You can show them the science about what screen time does to the child's, to anybody's brain. Show them the research, you know, have them set the limits on themselves, because when they're learning to set the limits on themselves, it's not like, you are not letting me do this. They're understanding that from within, they have set this limit for themselves, and they kind of have to follow it. Give them choices. Okay, you want to be on your device, you want to be on your Snapchat, but you also want to do something else. This is the time you are allotted. What do you choose to you know, to engage with on that device? So give them choices if you know, they're able to make those choices. So next we come to learning. And I know like Dr. Lothe and Dr. Mayanil have done lots of things related to the brain and the neuroanatomy and stuff. So I'm not going to get that much into that. But as the brain is developing in the womb with the mother carrying the child, the thing that comes up first is the primitive brain. So it's the brain stem that starts developing first. If you like go back to the first video and remember, you know, the Dr. Buckheimer showed you all the pictures of the brain as it develops in utero. So the primitive brain starts coming up first, and the brain stem is responsible for the basic functions of everyday life. So it's like eating, sleeping, you know, waking up, going to taking toxins out of your body. It deals with the chemical release of things to maintain temperature, all those kind of basic life-sustaining functions. And then the limbic system, or the mammalian brain, develops on top of the brainstem. So the limbic system is the home for our emotions. You know, Dr. Christakis talked about physiological responses to, you know, what the sensations bring in. So the limbic system kind of like organizes that. And then the thalamus is the gateway. So there's like a ton of sensations coming in to our brain. So the thalamus says, okay, this is important. This sensation is important, and we're going to do something with it. But this sensation is not so important. So we're going to kind of put it away for now. So that's what the limbic system does. And it connects us to the outside world. And it starts coming in online more when it's like when the child is born. So, you know, it starts developing more. And then the last thing to really develop and really grow is the neocortex. And that starts happening at 2 years of age. And the neocortex is responsible for like higher level thinking, for planning, for making maps related to time and space, and for, you know, making choices, and for developing a map of the world and giving meaning to that map. Like, what does this mean to me, to my growth, to my, you know, blooming as a person? So that's what the neocortex does. So sensations are what is happening like inside the body and what is happening outside the body. So we know the basic sensations. We know sight, we know hearing, we know taste, we know touch. There's also other senses that are, you know, we get senses from the muscle receptors in our body. We get sense of movement from the vestibular canals deep inside our ears. We get a sense of what is happening inside our body, like with the organs. You know, if you see something and you get a little tense, you can feel it in your stomach. Or if you're running really fast and your heart rate goes up, you can like feel your heart rate really boom, boom, boom. And then you tell yourself, okay, I need to like slow down a little bit. Or, you know, if you need to pee, then you get that sensation, I need to pee, and then you respond by going to the bathroom. So sensations are important in that way, and they tell you what's happening inside and outside. And sensations begin at like 23 days after conception. You know, the baby already at 23 days, when they're in the mom's tummy, they're hearing the sound of the mother's heartbeat. They're hearing and feeling the movement. When, you know, the mother is moving around, they get lulled to sleep because it's like a rocking movement. They hear and feel the, you know, the digestion happening in the mother's belly. So it starts to come in because it's really important for survival. So when this information comes in, all the sensory information, as I talked about, it goes to the thalamus, and then the thalamus has something called the reticular activating system that like goes up and takes it to the neocortex. So the integration of those senses happen. The important ones are, you know, something happens with those, and then the non-important ones are kind of kept in the background. And then we respond to whatever the stimulus was. And as we're responding, again, the senses are coming in. Oh, do we need to change something about our response? So there's like a feedback loop that goes on constantly with each and every input and before each and every output happens. So it's a very refined, beautiful system that really helps us, you know, go about with every millisecond of our day. So experience is based on the sensory input from our environment. And like I talked about, once that reticular activating system integrates those senses and sends it to the neocortex, which is the high level stuff, learning starts to happen. So one of the most important ways we learn is through our body. We learn through doing. You know, a lot of times like अभ्यास कर 3 तास बसायचं आहे, 1 तास बसायचं आहे, उठायचं नाही, you know, laksha de. So all that laksha and the ability to sit is going to come if your body's regulated, if your body's prepared. And what do we need for our body and our brain to be prepared? We need that movement to organize our brain. So the richness of the sensory environment, the freedom to explore our environment is what leads to more intricate patterns of learning. Necessarily sitting in one place and looking at a book doesn't really lead to the best kind of learning. So for kids, for little kids especially, and even big kids and even adults like ourselves, something that really helps with learning is play. So we want the play to be fun. We want it to be outdoors if possible, because nature is a veritable feast for our brain. You know, we learn so much from nature, and it becomes in sync, like our body becomes in sync with what's happening in nature. The play should be unstructured, which means it should be free play, because as the child is playing, they're putting together all their skills. They're integrating all their skills. They're pulling from different parts of the brain, and then it's going to the, you know, the neocortex, the frontal lobe, and they're learning. So play is what is, you know, work, what is productivity for older people, for adults. That's what play is for kids. It reinforces the brain architecture. So you really want them to play in a variety of ways. You want them to create their own play. You want them to have novel experiences. It's not like the same thing over and over again. You want them to play with different people so that they can kind of take and give and take and learn different things from different people. So again, play is important for self-regulation, and self-regulation we talked about is, you know, the coming together of our body state, of our thoughts, our emotions to come to the just right point so that we can really meet the demands of the task. We can meet the context of the environment. So it really helps with self-regulation, which is very important for all of us, but especially important for kids, because that's when they're going to be able to learn, because learning comes from executive functioning, which is the ability to focus attention, to build memory, you know, to practice our self-control. Like I'm sitting in the classroom and I have to wait. If I'm hungry, I can't just get up and go get my, you know, snack and start eating. I have to wait. Cognitive flexibility. Let's use different approaches. Let's adapt to something didn't work. I need to find a different way. I need to plan a different way to get what I need to get. So that is executive functioning, which is like a higher level thing. Oh, so before we talk about the summary, there is the adult role. What is the adult role in the child's life? Actually, you know what? I think I missed one more slide. Okay, so no. So we're going to talk about the adult role. So what is needed for basically, sorry, I missed a slide. I knew I missed a slide. So when the child is born, the early movements are very reflexive. So the child doesn't have a lot of movement. They're in the mom's womb. They're like this, you know, for what seems like eternity. And then they come out. So we have a lot of reflexes that are built into our brain when we come out of the mother's womb. And these reflexes really help with survival. So, you know, if you touch the child, the side of the child's lip, the child is going to turn, and then they're going to see who is who is there. If you put the bottle to the child's mouth, the child is going to start sucking. So these reflexes get integrated, and then they become purposeful volitional movement, which is like the child is actually reaching for stuff, and they're doing things with their hands and their legs, with their face. They're doing lots of different stuff. So head control comes first when the baby is put on the floor and they're given tummy time. They start raising their head, they start turning to side, and they start seeing like, oh, this is what is happening in my environment. Then they start rolling from their tummy to their back to tummy. It comes about 4 months. And then they start sitting up. About 6 to 9 months, then their muscles in the legs get stronger because the strength is going down the head, down the core to the muscles in the legs, and they start getting stronger. So they start pulling up to standing about 9 to 10 months, and then they start walking when they have that postural control and they've practiced the vestibular canals to standing up to gravity. They're standing up against gravity and they're starting to walk between like 12 to 18 months old. Then they're like playground ready at 18 to 24 months. So that's the motor part. The communication, for the child to be able to communicate, it needs social awareness, social interest, and motivation. So the social awareness and the social interest comes from the caregiver in their life. So even though it's a baby, they're giving you cues. They're giving the caregiver cues like, okay, I'm fussy, or, oh, I have a different cry, I'm squirming my body. So the caregiver picks up on these cues and it starts responding to the child. And then the child understands it's a give and take. And then as the children get older, you start playing with the child, you start talking to the child, you start holding the child and releasing the child to let them play on their own, but you're still present. So that social awareness and social interest is very important from a consistent caring caregiver. That attunement between the caregiver and the child tells the child that this is a person I trust with my life. As long as this person is around, I am good. So that will bring out that social emotional component will help them communicate because they're starting the communication with one person. So the child will start responding to their name about 3 months. You call the child's name and the child, no matter, oh, who called me? Or I hear my mother's voice. Where is she? That starts super early. Pointing is one of the most important milestones in just overall development. And that starts coming in about 14 months. And then the child will start using more words closer to like 12 months. They start with mama, baba, gaga, and then they start saying ball, or they start saying mama, baba, or they start saying, they'll use words that milk or, papa or something like that. They'll start using words that make the most influence in their life. And by 18 months, they should have about like 50 words or so. So the execution of movement, whether it's the muscles in our hands, legs, or even the muscles in our face, our voice, is what leads to actions. And then actions lead to thoughts. So, oh, there's a ball. I see the ball. I'm going to go get the ball. That's the action. The thought says, oh, I got the ball and now I can throw it to, my father. And oh, baba ni ball parat mala takla. So then that leads to emotions. Oh, like mala ekdam maja ite baba ni borobar khela. And I want to do this more. So it leads to an understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. So emotions are basically, in Latin, emotions mean emovere. It comes from the word emovere, and it means to reach out into action. So that's what the role of emotions is. So for learning, we need sensory input. We need social emotional connection, first with the caregiver and then, with the people in our environment. And we need movement. So these 3 things will lead to the best kind of learning. 80% of our perception is shaped by where we focus our attention. So we have to teach our kids that, we can change our reality. Other people do not dictate our reality. We can change our reality by changing what we focus on and what we give attention to, so that it's like we learn, we bloom from what we want to do with our life. So we talked about play, which I missed, which I skipped to before. So what is the adult role in the child's development? Of course, we know that the adult role is providing the basics, like we talked about food, making sure they sleep on time, water, making sure they have a safe home, they have a loving environment, and they have an enriching kind of context to be around. So it's important to engage with children. It's important to play with them. Even if your child is like 6 years old and you think, oh, they're going to play with their other friends, they don't need me to play with them. Play is very important. So play with your child. Sing to your child. Singing brings in a lot of good practice for communication. Read to your child. I started reading, my husband and I started reading to our son from the time he was like 6 months old. Listen to what your child has to say, even if they're going on and on. Girls will go on and on about their day, and boys will be like, how was your day? Good. Okay. Move on. But listen to your child. Get them to talk to you. Get them to tell you their experience, what happened in the day. Be a model for your child. We talked about those mirror neurons. So model, oh, we don't teach play, but through play, we're gonna play together. We're gonna sing together. We're gonna do something outside. We're gonna go to the grocery store. Model what you want the child to learn. As your kids get older, help them think about the consequences of their actions. Help them to develop patience. We have to wait in line. When we're at the grocery store, we have to wait to raise our hand till, the teacher says something. If you have something that you want to ask the teacher, teach them to problem solve. They are constantly going to face problems in their life. Even as toddlers, they will be facing problems. So if you see that the child is upset, teach them what are the different possibilities ahead of you. How can you problem solve through this? Teach them to set achievable goals, because if they learn to set their own goals and they see that they're meeting their goals, they're going to feel a sense of achievement, and they're going to be like, oh, I can do this. And you want that I can do this. You want them to build that self-confidence.
योगिता, सॉरी टू इंटरप्ट, पण आपल्याकडे आता थोडाच वेळ राहिलाय आणि मग शेवटी 5 मिनिटं प्रश्नांसाठी पण आपण ठेवूया. सो आय जस्ट वांटेड टू लेट यू नो.
Okay, sorry. So give them time to process. I'll just quickly run through these few. Give them time to process. Like we talked about at mealtime, they need time to process how to get that food into their belly. Give them time to process when they're learning new things. Give them time to process when they're starting something new. Give them lots of trial and error. Let them explore. Give them the time to explore their environment and come up with their own things. If they're not behaving properly, or if they're having an off day, redirect them. Praise the things that they do really, really well. And, reinforce things through repetition, like practicing something helps get it in our brain, and support them as they take on new challenges. Give them that avenue to try new things and take on new challenges, even though you think it might be a little hard for them. If they fail, they're learning. Our limbic system really helps us learn from our mistakes. So if they fail, as long as it's not a big failure that they're gonna, it's gonna hit their self-confidence. If it's a small, let them try at a level where there's not a lot to lose so that they can learn from their mistakes. I tell parents start chores at 18 months. Oh, you change out of your pajamas? Let's put the pajamas in the laundry basket. We finish playing with the toys before we start eating. Let's clean up the toys before we move to something else. And discipline is to guide and protect the child. It's not punishment. I know we all have off days. We say things we don't mean, but this child should know that this person, again, is trustworthy. Even if they're having an off day, even if they said something, I trust this person. I have a strong connection with this person, which will make them come back to me and which will make me come back to them if I'm ever in need of anything. And parenting is a process, that we want to prepare our child for independence. We want to prepare them to be self-fulfilled. We want to prepare them to be compassionate. We want to prepare them to go out into the world and be like a truly authentic person and be good with what they are with. We want them to show their authentic self out into the world. And in summary, so we have to remember the brain is very plastic. It's changeable. Even if you go through bad situations, if you have good situations, bad situations, whatever the thing is, the brain has the ability to reorganize and adapt itself. It can change. That's the beautiful thing about our brain. So the function of the brain is basically, to maintain survival. The survival of this person is the most important thing that the brain is going to do. But then it also functions to make us to be like a social animal, because we live in a society. So we want to be a social animal. So those are the two functions of the brain. The pathways we don't use get pruned, the cells die. So you want to you want to have your child explore new experiences. You want to give them varied experiences. Development is chronological. So basically it happens in order. You know, things don't just happen randomly and one day your child is just going to start talking. It doesn't work that way because skills build on top of each other. And development happens from head to toes. Head gets stronger, shoulders, core, legs. Development happens from big to small muscles, and it happens from simple learning, simple skills to more complex skills. And motor control is really symmetrical. So at 2 years old, you know, I want to see the baby using both hands. If the parent says to me, oh, I think माझा मुलगा, you know, right-handed आहे, 2 वर्षाचा आहे आणि already तो right hand जास्त use करतो and he's like right-handed. I say, no, that's not going to work because at 2 years old, we want the brain to integrate both sides of the body. And that integration is going to lead to higher level stuff. So if your child only uses one hand, you have to get them to use both hands together, both sides of the body, you know, equally. And then the last thing is genes. We have our genes, but our experiences regulate those genes. So the experience and the motivation and the temperament of the child is what leads to the best development of the child. So we want to give them those positive experiences. And if they do have negative experiences, we want to support them in ways that they can kind of overcome or adapt to those negative experiences. And I'm sorry, I know I practiced and I was in the time limit, but I think I talked more. So that is the end of the presentation. And like I said, I hope you got something out of it. And if you have any questions, we can open it now. We can open it up now.
Yeah, thank you so much, योगिता. तू आता सांगितलेली माहिती ऑफकोर्स ज्यांची लहान मुलं आहेत त्या पालकांसाठी तर महत्वाची आहे, त्या आजी आजोबांसाठी महत्वाची आहे, पण आपल्याला एकूणच ह्युमन डेव्हलपमेंट कशी होते हे कळलं की आपण ती स्वतःलाही माहिती कशी अप्लाय करू शकतो हे सुद्धा याच्यावरनं कळलं. सो थँक्यू सो मच. तर कुणाला काही प्रश्न आहेत का? जर असतील तर क्विकली विचारू शकता किंवा
मला कॉमेंट आहे, मस्त झाला योगिता, व्हेरी नाईस.
थँक्यू माधुरी.
छान झालं योगिता.
एक प्रश्न आहे, ऍट व्हॉट एज शुड चिल्ड्रन लर्न योगा?
So actually Madhuri is a good example because Madhuri, how old is Akash?
He turned 2 last month.
Okay, so Madhuri comes on my yoga class on Sundays, and you know, she sent me, I hope you're okay with me sharing this. She sent me little video clips of Akash, you know, who's 2 years old, and we talked about those mirror neurons. So he sees what's happening with his Ati or his Ai doing it, and he actually gets into the poses. And I think yoga is like, I used to teach child yoga classes, overseas, and I use it in my practice, even with like 18 months old kids. You know, you don't have to say we're gonna do yoga, you just make it fun. Oh, we're gonna be like a dog, let's get into, you know, Adha Mukha Shavasana and down dog, and become a dog, shake your tail, you know, oh, become tall like a tree. So there's a lot of great videos at the library or even on YouTube nowadays. You know, we talked about limiting device time, but this is where good device time is great for doing things like yoga that are appropriate for even like, you know, there's baby yoga along with the mothers where the baby's like 6 months old and the mother's doing yoga, but the baby's seeing that and the baby understands what's going on. So I say, because I'm a yoga teacher, I'm also saying it for that reason. It's like, you can start yoga whenever you want with the child. Have your child in the room and just see what they do.
Thank you. दूसरा प्रश्न आहे, any comments on autism?
So this session was basically just about normal development because I thought it's important to understand normal development before, you know, autism or any other kind of delays or diagnoses, or I don't want to say abnormal development, but different development is like a whole different topic. And if you suspect, I always tell parents, if you suspect something, bring it up with the doctor, you know, and if your doctor just shoos you away, but you feel like there's something in your gut, then, you know, talk to other people, see if you can say, okay, give me a referral for occupational therapy or speech therapy or whatever. If your gut is telling you something, if you start seeing, we talked about those cues that come in from the children. If you start seeing things which like, okay, माझा मोठा मुलगा असं करत नव्हता किंवा दुसरी ह्या वयाची मुलं असं करत नाहीत, काहीतरी मला वाटतंय, you know, start addressing those things. Like we talked about the pointing, which happens, you know, at 14 months. one of the most important indicators, responding to your name. Is this child kind of like in their own little world and that's where they're happy? Or is this child going out and interacting and engaging with other things? So those are the kind of cues that you'll start seeing where you have to have them addressed.
ओके. भावना ताई, तुम्ही हात वर केलाय, तुम्हाला बोलायचंय का?
हो, माझा आवाज येतोय ना? ऐकू येतो?
हो.
मला तुम्हा दोघींना म्हणजे सायली, अलका किंवा अंजली, इव्हन अनिघा ताई, स्पेशल एज्युकेशन वर काही असं एखादं सेशन तुम्हाला करता येईल का ऑर्गनाइज? स्पेशल एज्युकेशन त्यात आपण मग हे बोलू शकतो ना, ऑटिझम वगैरे.
हो. तर हो, थँक्यू भावनाताई. तर आपण नक्कीच करू. तर पुढच्या आठवड्यात आपण हेच करणार आहोत की आम्ही तुम्हाला विचारणार आहोत की तुम्हाला अजून कुठले विषय आहेत, कुठल्याही विषयावर ज्याच्यावर आपण सेशन्स घेऊ शकतो. तर तुम्ही तुमच्या आयडियाज तयार ठेवा आणि पुढच्या आठवड्यात आपण त्या सगळ्या कलेक्ट करू आणि नक्की त्यावर बोलू. आणि अजून जर कुणाला कॉमेंट्स नसतील तर आपली वेळ झाली आहे. योगिता, थँक्यू सो मच. आणि तुझ्याकडे खूप भांडार आहे इन्फॉर्मेशनचं. तर आम्ही तुला नक्की परत बोलवू, कारण जसं तू बघितलंस की खूप इंटरेस्ट आहे ह्या विषयात आणि इतर पण अजून डेव्हलपमेंटल डिलेज, ऑटिझम किंवा इतर स्पेसिफिक किंवा तुला जर एखादा विषय सुचला तर डेफिनेटली कम बॅक आणि वी वुड लव्ह टू हॅव यू. आणि सगळ्यात एक महत्वाची गोष्ट जी आपण नेहमी म्हणतो ती लक्षात ठेवणं आवश्यक आहे. तू म्हणालीस की मॉडेलिंग हे सगळ्यात महत्वाचं आहे की मुलांनी ते करावं. म्हणजे कुठल्याही वयाची मुलं असोत, अगदी लहान मुलांपासून टीनेजर्स पासून अगदी आपली मोठी 20, 22, 25 वर्षाची सुद्धा असोत, पण ते नेहमी स्वतःच्या पालकांकडे किंवा घरातल्या इतर मोठ्यांकडे बघून ते नकळत शिकत असतात. ते मिरर न्यूरॉन्स नेहमीच असतात आपले. तर आपल्या सगळ्यांना ह्याच्यातून घेण्यासारखं ते एक खूप महत्वाचं आहे की हे सगळं आपण आपल्या आयुष्यात पण कसं लागू करू शकतो. तर थँक्यू सो मच योगिता. इट वॉज अ ग्रेट सेशन.
आणि सायली, तू लास्ट वीकचं आम्हाला हे नाही पाठवलं.
तर मी गावाला गेले होते त्यामुळे मी ते डाउनलोड केलं नव्हतं, पण आता मी ते डाउनलोड करून सगळ्यांना युट्यूबवर पाठवत आहे. 1 तासात मी तुम्हाला मागच्या आठवड्यातलं अलकाचं सेशन पाठवते आणि मग नंतर योगिताचं पण आजचं सेशन पाठवते. सो सॉरी अबाउट दॅट.
थँक्यू. सगळ्यांना हॅपी होईल.
अजून दुसरे काही प्रश्न असले तर आय थिंक सायली कीप्स हे ओपन फॉर सम टाइम, सो यू कॅन पुट दोज क्वेश्चन्स ऑन देअर अँड